Sarah had always been the golden child, the one who was destined for greatness in the eyes of her parents. The daughter of influential business owners, she had been groomed from a young age to fit perfectly into the world of luxury and high society. From attending elite schools to being involved in charity events, Sarah had a life that most girls would envy. She was beautiful, intelligent, and well-spoken, all the qualities her parents expected from her. But Sarah wasn't just about meeting the standards set by others. She was independent, with dreams that stretched far beyond the expectations of her family. It was during one of those rare moments of freedom, when she'd slip away from the watchful eyes of her parents, that she met Liam. It had been a warm, lazy Saturday afternoon when Sarah, tired of the pretentious social gatherings her parents dragged her to, had decided to visit a local park to clear her mind. She had wandered along the winding pathways, seeking solace in the simplicity of nature, when she stumbled upon a small, bustling art fair. One particular booth caught her attention, a display of intricately carved wooden sculptures. Each piece, though simple in concept, was masterfully executed, and Sarah found herself drawn to them. Behind the booth stood Liam. He was not what she expected. His clothes were worn and faded, his hands rough from years of labor. He had the air of someone who was comfortable in his own skin, someone who didn't need the validation of others to feel complete. His deep brown eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. Liam smiled, and it was the kind of smile that didn't try to win anyone over, but rather, invited curiosity. "Do you like them?" he asked, his voice low but warm. Sarah nodded, a little caught off guard by his directness. "They're beautiful. You made them?" "I did," Liam replied, looking pleased but not boastful. "It's a passion of mine. Woodworking, I mean. I've been at it for years." They talked for a while about the pieces he had crafted, and Sarah found herself fascinated by his words. There was something about his quiet confidence, the way he spoke about his craft with genuine passion, that made her feel as if she were seeing the world through a new lens. In that brief exchange, Sarah's carefully constructed world seemed to lose some of its sheen. There was no pretense with Liam. His life wasn't about appearances or status, it was about authenticity. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself returning to the park more and more, seeking out the small corner where Liam's booth was set up. They began to talk outside of the fair as well, sharing coffee in a quiet cafe or walking along the riverside, lost in conversation. Liam wasn't interested in impressing her with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he offered her something far more valuable, a genuine connection. Sarah had always felt isolated in her world, surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than a social asset, a pawn in the game of wealth and prestige. But with Liam, she felt like she could be herself. As their relationship grew, so did her feelings for him. It wasn't just about the things they had in common, but about how he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't experienced before. With him, she didn't have to pretend. She could laugh freely, speak her mind, and explore the parts of herself that had long been buried under the weight of her family's expectations. But despite her growing affection for Liam, Sarah knew that the real test would come when she had to introduce him to her parents. They had always been very particular about who she spent her time with. "You're throwing away your future." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "I don't want to live the life you've planned for me. I want to live my own life on my terms." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her parents exchanged a glance, and Sarah could see the disappointment and anger in their eyes. It was a look she had seen many times before, but it never hurt quite as much as it did now. Her father let out a short, sharp laugh. "Of course you don't. But you can't seriously think that someone like him will be able to provide you with what you need in life. You're talking about a future with a man who has no prospects, no influence. What will people think?" Her mother's voice was colder now. "You are throwing away everything we've worked for, Sarah." The people she associated with had to be a reflection of their success and stature. To her parents, anyone from a background like Liam's, working class with no notable connections, was simply not someone they could accept into their world. It was a truth Sarah had learned early on. She had seen how her parents looked at her friends from school, how they always tried to matchmake her with sons of other influential families, or how they turned their noses up at anyone who didn't meet their standards. She was expected to marry someone who could provide her with the kind of lifestyle she had always known. But none of that mattered when she thought of Liam. He was different. He made her feel seen in a way no one else had. One evening, after several months of seeing Liam in secret, Sarah decided it was time to tell her parents. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, but she also knew she couldn't keep hiding her feelings. She had planned to ease into the conversation, to give them a little time to understand. She never imagined, though, just how quickly things would unravel. The dinner table that night was filled with tension, the usual calm of their elegant dining room replaced by a quiet unease. Her parents sat across from her, both of them dressed in their customary finery. They had the air of authority, their expressions unreadable, as they waited for Sarah to speak. "I've been seeing someone," she began, her voice slightly shaking but firm. "His name is Liam." Her father, the head of the family, set down his wine glass with a slow, deliberate motion. "Liam?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is he from a reputable family?" "No, he's not," Sarah admitted, feeling the weight of the moment. "But he's a good man and I care for him." Her mother's lips tightened, her fingers clutching the stem of her wine glass. "Sarah, darling, you're not thinking clearly. You're talking about a man who makes a living from carpentry. Do you really think he can offer you the kind of life you deserve?" "I don't need all of that," Sarah replied, trying to remain calm. "I don't need the status or the wealth to be happy." "You're making a terrible mistake," her father said, his voice low and controlled. "If you choose this man, you're on your own. You'll no longer be part of this family. We will have no further connection with you." The finality of his words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She had expected resistance, even anger, but not this. She had hoped that, in time, her parents would come to see what she saw in Liam. But now, in the face of their rejection, she realized that was never going to happen. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She simply looked at them, her heart breaking. Her entire life had been leading up to this moment. And now, it felt as if everything she had known was slipping away. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I love him. I'm going to be with him." With that, she stood up, her chair scraping across the floor as she walked out of the room. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She knew that this was the point of no return. As she left the house that night, the sound of her parents' voices faded behind her, replaced by the quiet of the night air. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She had made her choice. And no matter what happened, she wouldn't regret it. After Sarah walked out of the house that fateful evening, the world seemed to shift beneath her feet. Everything she had known, everything she had been raised to believe, felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The only thing that was clear in that moment was the man who had captured her heart, Liam. She had chosen him, and with that decision, everything she had once taken for granted, the comforts of her wealthy upbringing, the life her parents had designed for her, was left behind. The first few weeks after Sarah left her family were a whirlwind of emotions. She found herself caught between a deep sense of relief and a hollow emptiness that lingered whenever she was alone. The weight of her decision hung over her, but it was a weight she was willing to carry. She knew deep down that she had made the right choice, but the path ahead wasn't easy. The world outside of her parents' protective bubble was not as forgiving as she had imagined. Liam, on the other hand, had been nothing but supportive. From the moment Sarah had confided in him about her family's reaction, he never wavered. He didn't need to tell her that he understood. He simply showed it through his actions. He had never been one to dwell on the past, or the things that couldn't be changed. Instead, he focused on the present, on building a future for the two of them, no matter how small or modest it might be. Sarah moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town. It wasn't the lavish penthouse she had once imagined for herself, but it was hers. She liked the idea of having a space that was entirely her own. The walls were plain, the furniture was minimal, but it was cozy. And most importantly, it was filled with the promise of something new, something real. She couldn't help but compare it to the life she had left behind. The high-end furniture, the polished marble floors, the sparkling chandeliers, they were all distant memories now. At times, she felt as though she were living someone else's life, but the thought quickly passed as Liam came to her side each evening. His presence was the one constant that made everything feel right. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes. He worked tirelessly every day, sometimes from dawn until late into the night, crafting his pieces with precision and care. His small carpentry shop, a few blocks away from their apartment, was where he spent most of his time, but whenever he returned home, he was always ready to offer Sarah a warm smile and a quiet moment together. Though Sarah missed her family and the familiarity of her old life, she couldn't help but be excited about the future. She knew that the life she had now was far from perfect, but it was hers to build piece by piece. And so she began to make her own way, carving out a new path for herself in the world. The days blended together as Sarah adjusted to this new life. She found a part-time job at a local cafe. A far cry from the corporate role she had once imagined herself in, but it gave her a sense of purpose. The cafe, a cozy little place nestled between two shops, became her second home. She learned the names of regular customers, some of whom were friendly and others who barely acknowledged her presence, but she didn't mind. The cafe was a world of its own, and in it, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace. She found joy in the small things, helping a customer with a smile, chatting with the barista about their favorite books, or just savoring a quiet moment in the middle of the bustling cafe. As the days passed, Sarah and Liam's bond grew stronger. He would often visit her at the cafe after finishing his work, bringing with him the scent of sawdust and fresh wood. They would sit together, talking about everything and nothing, the rhythm of their lives settling into something comfortable. Liam would listen attentively as Sarah shared her day's events, offering a kind word of encouragement or a thoughtful insight. In turn, Sarah would listen as Liam spoke about his work, his dreams, and his hopes for the future. Though they had little in terms of material wealth, they had something far more valuable. A deep connection, built on trust and understanding. It was a bond that transcended money, status, or societal expectations. And it was this bond that made all the difference. As weeks turned into months, Sarah began to see the fruits of their labor. Liam's craftsmanship began to catch the attention of a few local businesses, who commissioned him to create custom furniture. The work was slow at first, but with each piece his reputation grew. He poured his heart into his work, ensuring that every item he created was perfect. His dedication was paying off, and Sarah couldn't have been prouder of him. Their small apartment began to feel less like a temporary space, and more like a home. They decorated it with pieces Liam had crafted himself, wooden shelves, a sturdy dining table, and a cozy set of chairs. They didn't need much to feel at ease. The space they had together was enough. In the evenings, when they had a rare moment of peace, they would cook dinner together, sharing the small joys of their everyday life. But not all of their challenges came from the outside world. Sarah found herself at odds with the life she had left behind. Her parents' rejection of her choice to marry Liam still stung. Even though she had convinced herself that it was the right decision, there were moments when she felt a deep ache in her chest, wondering if things could ever be the same between her and her family. She missed the lavish dinners, the extravagant holidays, the comfortable feeling of belonging to something larger than herself. But as time went on, Sarah began to realize that her old life, as grand as it had seemed, had never truly fulfilled her. The endless parties and designer clothes were a form of distraction, a way to cover up the emptiness she had felt for so long. Now, with Liam by her side, she felt a sense of fulfillment that money could never provide. She wasn't constantly trying to prove herself to others. She wasn't living for someone else's expectations. She was living for herself. Still, the world outside their small apartment remained a constant reminder of the life Sarah had left behind. Her friends, those who hadn't already drifted away, often invited her to gatherings and events, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to attend. She had no desire to return to the shallow world of status and competition. Whenever she did speak with her parents, it was strained. Their words were polite, but the underlying tension was palpable. They made it clear that they disapproved of her choice, and that they didn't want anything to do with Liam. Their rejection, though difficult, had not been without consequence for her as well. She had been cast out of a world she had known her entire life. One evening, as Sarah and Liam sat together in their apartment, enjoying a quiet dinner, Sarah voiced her frustrations. "I sometimes wonder if I'll ever be able to make peace with my family," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. I miss them, Liam. I miss the comfort of knowing I belong somewhere. Liam reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You belong with me, he said softly, his voice steady and reassuring. And I belong with you. That's all that matters. Sarah smiled at him, feeling the warmth of his words sink deep into her heart. I know, she said quietly. But I can't help but wonder if there's a way to fix things with them. To show them that I made the right choice. Liam didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. Maybe it's not about fixing things, he said finally. Maybe it's about accepting that your life is different now. Your family may never understand. But that doesn't change who you are, or the life you're building with me. That's all that matters. His words were simple, but they resonated deeply within Sarah. He was right. She couldn't change the past, and she couldn't force her family to accept her choices. But she could control the present, and the present was filled with love, happiness, and the possibility of a future built on her own terms. In the coming weeks, Sarah and Liam's life continued to evolve. The struggles were still there, the financial worries, the occasional doubts, and the lingering tension with her family. But they were also joined by a sense of accomplishment and growth. Slowly but surely, their small business began to take off. Word of mouth spread, and they started to receive more and more clients, from local cafes to even a few boutique hotels that were eager to showcase Liam's work. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She had found her place in the world, not in the life her parents had designed for her, but in the life she had created with Liam. As she sat by the window one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah realized that, despite the challenges they faced, she had everything she needed. She had love, she had purpose, and she had a future, one she had chosen for herself, and that she knew was enough. The months turned into years, and as time went by, Sarah and Liam's life together began to take shape in ways they had never imagined. Their small, humble apartment became a true home, a place filled with laughter, love, and the warmth of shared memories. And while they had started with little more than their dreams and determination, those very qualities began to transform their lives in ways they couldn't have foreseen. Liam's carpentry business had slowly but surely started to grow. It hadn't been easy at first. The early days had been filled with long hours, exhausting work, and a constant struggle to make ends meet. But their shared sense of purpose, the unshakable belief that they were building something worth fighting for, kept them going through the hardest times. It wasn't just about money. It was about the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. Every piece of furniture that Liam crafted, every table, chair, or bookshelf was a labor of love. He poured his soul into his work, and over time, people began to notice. It started small, word of mouth, friends of friends, people who had seen his work at a local cafe or boutique. The attention was gradual at first, but it was steady. Soon, Liam had a few clients who appreciated the craftsmanship he put into each piece. What started as small commissions for local businesses began to grow into larger, more prestigious projects. The recognition was slow, but it was there, like a seed quietly sprouting beneath the surface. Sarah, too, had found a way to contribute to their growing success. She had always loved design, and although her education and career had once been focused on a more conventional corporate path, she found herself drawn back to her artistic side. As Liam's work began to take off, Sarah started helping him with the design aspect. She would spend hours sketching out new concepts for pieces, blending functionality with aesthetics. Her eye for design and Liam's skillful craftsmanship made for an unstoppable combination. At first, Sarah had worried about her lack of experience in the field, but Liam was always there to reassure her. You're better than you think, he would tell her. You see the world in ways that others don't. Trust your instincts. With each successful project, their confidence grew. What had started as a small, modest venture began to evolve into a thriving business. Their clients were more than satisfied, they were impressed. Word of their work spread across the city, and soon they were taking on larger commissions, from small boutique hotels to high-end restaurants and cafes. What had once been a tiny, overcrowded workshop became a legitimate business, with employees, regular clients, and the kind of reputation that people paid attention to. The money, of course, didn't hurt. After years of scraping by, The pair finally found themselves able to live a more comfortable life. They moved into a larger home, still modest by most standards, but infinitely more spacious than their first apartment. The home was filled with light, airy rooms and windows that let the sun pour in during the early morning hours. It was a home that reflected who they had become, people who had learned to value the things that truly mattered. It wasn't opulent, but it was theirs. It was a space where they could relax, create, and grow. A far cry from the lavishness Sarah had known in her former life. Despite the growing success, however, their journey was not without its challenges. The pressures of running a business were immense. As their reputation continued to build, so did the demands placed on them. There were endless meetings, late nights, and decisions to be made. Some easy, some difficult. There were moments when both Sarah and Liam felt overwhelmed, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But through it all, they had each other. They had a shared dream that they were both committed to making a reality. Still, the most challenging part of their success came not from the business itself, but from the people who had once been part of Sarah's life, her parents. Despite the undeniable success they had achieved, her family refused to acknowledge it. They had cut Sarah off years ago, and though she had tried to reach out on several occasions, her parents remained steadfast in their disapproval. They couldn't or wouldn't accept that Sarah had chosen a life that didn't fit their vision of success. Her parents' rejection weighed heavily on Sarah, but over time, she began to understand something that had been hard to grasp at first. She didn't need their approval. She had spent so much of her life seeking their validation, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. But now, as she looked at the life they had built together, she realized that this was what mattered. She didn't need their recognition to prove that she had made the right choice. Liam's love and support, and the business they had built from the ground up, were more than enough. Yet, there were still moments when Sarah couldn't help but long for her family's acceptance. It was a natural part of her, the daughter of wealthy parents, raised to believe that familial ties were sacred, and that family approval was essential. But as time went on, she came to accept that her parents' view of her life would never change, and that perhaps it wasn't her path to fix. The world she had chosen, the world with Liam, was enough. One day, as Sarah and Liam sat in their new home, sipping coffee on their porch as the sun set, Sarah found herself lost in thought. She gazed at the small garden they had begun to cultivate, the flowers Liam had planted, and the wooden chairs they had crafted together. It was a simple scene, but it felt like everything she had ever needed. Liam, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face, set his cup down and looked at her. "What's on your mind?" Sarah smiled softly, a trace of sadness lingering in her eyes. "I was just thinking about how much has changed, how much we've built together." Liam nodded, a quiet understanding in his gaze. He had always been a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He knew exactly what she meant. "It's been a journey, hasn't it?" he said, his voice low but filled with pride. "But we did it. Together. Together." The word echoed in Sarah's mind. She had spent so many years trying to please others, trying to fit into a life that wasn't truly hers. But now, in this moment, she realized that the life she had built with Liam, their quiet, peaceful existence, was exactly what she had always wanted. It wasn't about the wealth or the status. It was about love, partnership, and creating something meaningful. "Do you think we'll ever hear from them?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you think they'll ever come around?" Liam paused for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. He knew how much Sarah had struggled with her family's rejection, but he also knew that deep down, it wasn't something she could change on her own. It had to be a decision they made together, if it ever happened. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do know that it doesn't matter as much as it used to. We've made something here, Sarah, and it's ours." Sarah nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. The ache of her parents' rejection was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had found her own path, one that was full of challenges, but also full of rewards. She had found purpose, love, and happiness. And with Liam by her side, she knew they could face whatever the future held. As the weeks passed, their business continued to thrive. They expanded, taking on larger projects and building relationships with designers and business owners who appreciated their unique approach to craftsmanship. What had once been a small operation in a cramped workshop had become a thriving enterprise. They hired a few more employees to help with the increasing demand, and though it wasn't always easy, Sarah and Liam felt an overwhelming sense of pride in what they had accomplished. But it wasn't just about the success of the business. It was about the life they had built together, the love they had nurtured, and the sense of fulfillment they had found in doing something that was true to who they were. Sarah and Liam's success was not measured by the size of their bank account or the number of clients they served. It was measured by the life they had created, the community they had built, and the love that bound them together. As Sarah looked around at the life they had built, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. She had everything she needed. She had Liam, and that she realized was enough. Years had passed since Sarah and Liam had first built their life together. Their love, once questioned by those closest to her, had not only survived but flourished. They had weathered the storms that life had thrown at them. Financial struggles, the doubts of outsiders, and their own personal fears about whether they had made the right choices. Yet in the end, Sarah had come to realize something profound. Her happiness wasn't determined by the expectations of her family, the opinions of society, or the number of zeros on a paycheck. It was determined by the people she chose to be around, and the values she chose to uphold. Her parents had remained distant. Despite the years that had passed, despite the undeniable success of her and Liam's business, they refused to acknowledge their daughter's decisions. Sarah had reached out countless times, but the response was always the same, a polite but cold rejection. First, this hurt deeply. Sarah had wanted so much for them to understand, to see what she saw in Liam, and the life they had created together. But as the years went on, her understanding deepened. She realized that their refusal to accept her choices wasn't a reflection of her worth. It was a reflection of their own limitations, their inability to see beyond the world they had created for themselves. Their rejection no longer felt like a personal wound, but a release. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound thing you can do is to let go of the need for approval from others. In the years following their success, Sarah and Liam's business flourished. They had expanded their shop, taken on bigger projects, and established a reputation that went beyond just the city. People traveled from far and wide to commission pieces from them. They were respected in their field, not because they came from wealth or privilege, but because they had worked tirelessly and passionately to build a business from the ground up. But despite all their accomplishments, Sarah and Liam remained grounded. They were proud of what they had achieved, but they never let it define them. Their success was a means to an end, not the end itself. But as life continued, they found themselves becoming more and more isolated from the world they had left behind. Sarah had slowly distanced herself from the social circles she had once inhabited. The friends who had once filled her life with empty chatter and superficial conversations had slowly faded from view. It wasn't that Sarah had turned her back on them, but more that she had grown out of the need for that kind of validation. She had something real now, a deep connection with Liam, a thriving business, and a life that, while not perfect, was meaningful and full of purpose. Then one chilly autumn afternoon, everything changed. It had been a particularly busy week for the couple. They had just completed a large order for a high-end hotel, and were preparing for another large project that would take them into the new year. As they were finishing their day, packing up tools and organizing the shop, the door to the workshop creaked open. A soft chime echoed through the room, signaling the arrival of a customer. Sarah looked up, expecting to see one of the regulars from a nearby cafe, or perhaps a new business contact looking for a custom piece. Instead, her heart skipped a beat as she saw the familiar faces of her parents standing in the doorway. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The world outside of their little workshop ceased to exist. Sarah felt a rush of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and something that she couldn't quite put into words. Her parents, the people who had disowned her all those years ago, were standing right in front of her. Her mother, dressed in a tailored coat and designer shoes, looked just as she had the last time Sarah had seen her. Perfectly put together, the image of a life Sarah had walked away from. Her father, ever the quiet and stoic figure, stood beside her, his expression unreadable. Sarah didn't know what to say. The air between them felt thick with unspoken words, with years of separation and hurt. She glanced at Liam, who stood behind her, his calm demeanor offering her a sense of reassurance. He had been through it all with her, and he stood as a quiet pillar of strength. He didn't need to say anything, but his presence was grounding, as it always was. "Mom. Dad." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. It had been so long since she had spoken to them, and she wasn't sure what kind of reaction she was expecting. Anger? Regret? Disappointment? She wasn't sure. Her mother was the first to speak. "We've been watching from afar," she said, her voice more subdued than Sarah had ever heard it. "We've seen what you've built. And well, we wanted to see it for ourselves." For a long moment, Sarah stood still, unsure how to process what her mother had said. This wasn't the harsh rebuke she had expected. This was something different. Her parents weren't here to fight, to reprimand her for her choices. They were here, in the workshop, standing amidst the very thing they had once rejected. Sarah started, but her words failed her. She looked at her father, who still hadn't spoken, but his gaze was softer than it had been in the past. He met her eyes, and for the first time in years, Sarah saw something that looked like regret in his expression. It wasn't an apology, not yet anyway, but it was something close. "You've done well for yourselves," her father said, his voice low but steady. "I don't think we ever truly understood what it was that made you so determined, but it's clear now. You've built something real." Liam, ever the quiet observer, stepped forward then, his hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. His words weren't filled with bitterness or reproach. He didn't need to say anything more. His presence spoke volumes. He had never needed to prove himself to anyone, least of all Sarah's parents. He had always been proud of their life together, and he wasn't about to change that. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of years of separation, of unspoken apologies, of things left unsaid. Slowly, Sarah took a deep breath and smiled faintly. "It's been a long time," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "But it's good to see you both." Her mother nodded. "We've missed you," she said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about the choices I made, about how I treated you, and I know I was wrong." Her father, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, sighed softly. "We were wrong," he added, his voice rough with emotion. "We thought we knew what was best for you, and we didn't understand what you were trying to do. But now seeing the life you've created, it's clear that you made the right choice." There it was, the words Sarah had waited so long to hear. The apology, the recognition. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It wasn't just about the business or the success they had achieved. It was about Sarah's choice to live authentically, to choose love and purpose over wealth and status. And her parents had finally seen it after all this time. "I think we have a lot to talk about," Sarah said, her voice steady now, a sense of clarity and peace settling over her. She looked at Liam, who gave her a small but encouraging smile. This was their moment. Not for reconciliation, not for erasing the past, but for accepting that things could be different now. They had both changed, and that was okay. Her mother nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'd like that." As the evening unfolded, they all sat down together in the small workshop. Sarah and Liam, her parents, and the life they had all built in different ways. They talked, not about the past, but about the future, about the business, about Sarah and Liam's life, and about the possibility of new beginnings. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. But in that quiet moment, Sarah realized that she had gotten everything she needed from this encounter. An acknowledgement of her choices, the recognition of the life she had built, and most importantly, the knowledge that her parents had finally accepted her for who she was. It was the closure Sarah hadn't known she needed, and with it, she could finally let go of the weight of her past, knowing that her future was secure in the love and success she had created with Liam. The night ended not with a dramatic farewell, but with a quiet promise of forgiveness, of new beginnings, and of a life that, in its own imperfect way, had turned out exactly as it should have.